The first thing that the DFR does is it increases the safety of everybody involved, the responders, the people on the scene. It improves operational effectiveness. By 25% on average of the DFR programs across the board are returning units to service before the first ground unit arrives on the scene. Wow, that's incredible. And then what's really been amazing is that real-time situational awareness, as you all have seen. And then the last thing is it has proven to be one of the biggest de-escalators in that world for law enforcement. And I just want to share one story before we forget this, is that in Chula Vista, the car fire on I-5, there's a video on YouTube. And if you haven't seen it, you need to go see it, because literally they had a report of a car fire I-5, which they don't respond to normally. And it had conflicting information as to location. The DFR drone within seconds identified the exact location and the heavy volume of fire. And the sergeant informed his units to respond to I-5. And they got there and switch over to body cameras. And literally they get there, there's a person in this burning vehicle. They break the window out the back. They pull the person out of the window. And as they pull them out, the car is fully involved. There was not a second to spare. So those are the kind of stories that really make the difference of how this is changing it. But from a law enforcement officer, from all the drone programs we see, we always start off with everybody thinking we don't want a drone program. We think they're toys. They're not really going to do much until they start playing their roles, especially in DFR. Then the question is, where's the drone when it's not there?
What we continue to see is that the benefit of getting there 2 to 3 minutes before anybody else is what makes all the difference. And so, there's so many of these stories. We got there first, so we happened to see that, the person with the gun threw it in this particular bush, so we could go look in that bush and find the weapon. A couple of the recent ones that I've done that are, one of them is actually pretty funny. We got called out to an unconscious woman in the parking lot of the Little Caesars. And within 60 seconds, we were able to say she was not unconscious. She was eating pizza, and we could see the pepperoni on the pizza. So, it's a silly story, but it illustrates the point, which is that within 60 seconds, we were able to cancel police, fire, and EMS and help people get back to running more important calls that day. So, there's so many of those stories. I mean, I was just involved with one 2 weeks ago where an officer was in an altercation with a suspect and couldn't get to his radio and call for help. We knew exactly where that officer was and were able to direct other officers in to help him. There was another one just the other day, not even a week ago, domestic violence dispute. And as soon as he saw the first officer run in, he took off and ran out through the woods. And of course, we knew exactly where he was because we had the drone overhead, and the officers were waiting for him right when he came out the other side of the woods. So, I mean, there's a zillion stories like that, and I'm sure, Matt, Roland, you've got a million of them as well. But it's really great to see, even on the calls where we aren't there first, but, we're just there in an officer safety capacity. In a couple of our programs, we've been working a lot of traffic stops where, they could go bad at any moment. We're there to just watch over and make sure that the officers are safe.
One of the stories from DFR last fall was we had a report of a subject that was carrying a gun, is what they said. And he was walking near train tracks. So we flew the drone down there, and we were able to locate the subject before officers got there. And it turns out it was a radio that was in his hand. And then he had a camera. And he was actually a train enthusiast and was waiting for the train to come through so that he could take pictures of it as it went by. And he had no weapons, no ill will, no ill intent. The drone was able to see that it was a radio and that it was a camera. And so instead of it being a high priority person with a weapon type of run, we were able to relay the information. Hey, this guy's just carrying a radio and a camera. That's what we see with the drone. So obviously officers still have to approach that in certain ways, in the ways that we're trained, but it gives them, it's a de-escalation tool, right? It gives them more information about what's going on as they're arriving, what the drone's seeing, and it also, we were able to exactly pinpoint where he was because the caller kind of didn't have the greatest spot of where he was. So that was one. And then the other one was a hit skip accident. And they got out and ran from the car, and officers were in the area. The drone was in the area, and on the drone, and I think you saw this one, right? You saw the person went from behind one house into a neighbor's house. like ran through the house. And did you go through two houses maybe?
She tried to get in the basement of the first house, ran out the back, and then went to the neighboring house.
And the drone saw her do that. No officer saw her do that. And it was a door that was able to be closed behind a bush. And if the drone hadn't been there and hadn't seen that, no one would have ever known where they went. So that we were able to then direct officers to where we saw the suspect go in, and then they were able to go make an arrest. We also do fly DFR to large fires. We had one last fall that we flew 6 or 8 missions out to help fire with where the hot spots were, where to move manpower to. So we did assist them with that, and our docks are on top of a fire station. So we have done some of that cooperative effort together, and then they come to our training days too every month.
We've had a lot of successful days here. And last week we had a lot of successes on multiple successes several days last week. And it sparked a conversation between myself and one of our team members about, how important is a program like DFR integrating with a real-time crime center? How important is that to economic development in the city? And one of the things that we realize is, hey, in Brookhaven, we do send these drones to a lot of low acuity events like shoplifting calls. But what we find is those shoplifting calls, we tend to get the property back and return it to the business. And so the business starts to see their loss start to go down. And so there's a benefit for businesses to establish their business in a city that's forward thinking like Brookhaven, because maybe they don't experience as much loss from theft in their stores as other jurisdictions. And so instead of just saving lives, not just isolating it to that, but really it is a quality of life multiplier for public safety. In that same day, we also had a success where someone called 911 saying that there was someone selling illegal drugs in a parking lot. And what would have usually required patrol officers to go out, maybe try to set up some surveillance and make contact to do some sort of investigatory stop. We just parked the drone over here for a couple of minutes and observed 2 hand-to-hand drug transactions. And it wasn't just the drone pilot, but several people in the department logged in and watched that and were like, hey, there's a hand-to-hand. Hey, there's another hand-to-hand. And in that, they stopped that person who was selling the drugs. They got crack cocaine, methamphetamine, you name it. It was a whole pharmacy of drugs right there in that car. Got that offender, got the 2 people who purchased drugs as well from that person, all off of what we were able to do with DFR. And so those small instances where an agency may not deploy a helicopter or some other asset because it's just not cost effective, we're really seeing drones pay dividends. And so we're making sure people aren't being taken advantage of because they got an addiction issue. Little small basic things that every cop signs up to do the job for. We want to help communities be healthy and safe. We're seeing wins with drones.
One incident that kind of stands out in mind to me that we dealt with, we had a vehicle pursuit. The car ended up crashing, guy took off running. We would have never found him without that drone. He was out in the area, like 3 foot tall grass. He was laid down, had a coat over him. It was somewhat cold out. It was nighttime, but that drone, it was a perfect scenario. And the operator did a great job utilizing the radio and transferring information over to the officers that were walking through the grass coming up to the suspect. I mean, they were within, a foot of him and didn't see him. With the thermal, with the heat transfer, you could see, him throw his coat up. He stood up. It actually still looked like he was laying on the ground. But that was a perfect scenario, something that we've dealt with. We utilize our drones for tactical support, indoor operations, a lot of crash scenes, mapping crash scenes, search and rescue, suspect searches.
It's also important to remember that what we're not saying is drones are going to take the job of officers. What we're saying is we're already 30% understaffed. So let's take some of that understaffing problem away, and not, because that's a stigma we fight all the time with our clients is, certainly from helicopter pilots, but even from, patrol drone operators and even just patrol officers is, well, what am I going to do if the drone's doing all the work? What's in it for me? And, it's important to know that this is an adjunct tool. It's not taking a job from somebody. There just aren't enough officers who want to do this job. So we got to help with the tools that we've got.